The next person up is Professor Curt Rice. He is the rector of NMBU right now. He is an American. Maybe I can say that. You have lived in Norway maybe longer than you have lived in the United States. But Curt Rice went to Oxford University, so he has his bachelor's from there. I also know his wife. They have been great, really role models for the way of immersion for language learning, so which I've been a part of in the United States, actually. So I want to welcome you to the podium too, Professor Rice, and your session will be Roots and Boots. No, sorry, that is you. I jumped too far. My apologies. Get your move on. Universities, pandemics, and the future of internationalization.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to those of you who are following along from afar as well. It's such a privilege to be here today and to have the opportunity to reflect and tell a little bit about the work that we're trying to do at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences that's related to the topic of our session today. Unlike many of the others of you, I did not know Tord Heyerdahl, and I haven't had the chance to study his work so carefully, but I did enjoy learning some about his work in preparation for today. And as our colleague from the city government referred to, I was inspired especially by this quote that you promote here about borders. I've never seen one, but I've heard they exist in the minds of some people. I wish I could say that had been my personal experience, but I think it's a wonderful goal and an idealistic perspective. And it's certainly true that I would like to see us move in the direction of a greater prioritization of social and personal and societal development rather than a strengthening of borders in ways that are in the news even in the last couple of days. It's wonderful that we can try to combine topics like internationalization and migration with sustainable development goals, and of the ones that were mentioned in the introduction this morning, it's especially the last one of the SDGs, number 17, about partnerships, that is really important for me in my work as a university president. These goals are incredibly complex and also interrelated in ways that are scientifically interesting. For example, one thing I'm very interested in is about educating girls in poor countries and how that relates to things like poverty reduction and thereby reduced inequality and thereby better public health and thereby reduced population growth, and the connections here are massive. That compels us to think in our scientific work about interdisciplinarity and what that means. These problems are so big that we can't really tackle them easily with one field. We have to find ways at universities to reduce the tendency to work in silos. This approach and these ideas about interdisciplinarity really are necessary to inspire academic cooperation. And at the university that I lead, which has a historical focus on agricultural and veterinary issues, these tensions pop up also. So if we want to think about how to reduce hunger, which is something that we care a lot about at my institution, that perhaps goes hand in hand with increasing agricultural productivity. And that has some negative effects on biodiversity, on soil quality, on health issues, on access to water, on all sorts of things. So these are incredibly complex goals in and of themselves, and the interaction of them is even more complicated. We have a commitment at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. In Norwegian, we say that we have a felles innsats for en bærekraftig fremtid, and that means that we work together to create a sustainable future. And when we're trying to create the conditions for that, we're trying to build up strong disciplines, high-quality research, high-quality education, and a culture of interdisciplinarity. And that we do in lots of ways. And I'd like to mention a couple of those. One of them is that we've developed something that we call sustainability arenas. So we have identified several groups on campus which necessarily work across faculty boundaries in order to advance our work on sustainability. Two of those are especially related to our topics today about migration and identity, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those in a moment. But just as important as the interdisciplinarity that we're working on is the international perspective that we try to bring to our work. At the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, 20% of our undergraduate and master students are foreigners. 50% of our PhD students are foreigners. So we have on the one hand, a foundation for internationalization of our work, but we still aren't thinking about it enough as a resource in the work that we're doing. Universities play a very, very important role. The nature of the institution is to create new knowledge, whether that's through education of students or through the discoveries of research. And international cooperation is essential to that, not only in terms of cooperation, but also because it creates the opportunity for the sharing and transfer of knowledge. So we have, for example, at the university where I work, we have an agroecology program that's almost entirely international students. The issues are international. There's a very high number of international faculty members there. And we work there to try to bring the perspectives of those students and faculty into that work. The arguments for the benefits of diversity of many kinds are well known, and when people come together to solve a problem with different backgrounds, the likelihood of innovative solutions is increased. So part of the job that we have to do at the universities is to appreciate and directly exploit the internationalization of the population there. Science is international by nature, and if you're aspiring to excellence, you have to work with the best people. That perspective has been the source of a rather intense debate in the Norwegian media in recent weeks about the position of foreigners in academia. According to people who keep track of these statistics, almost 30% of the employees in Norwegian universities are foreigners. And that creates the situation for something that we can see around the world in lots of different contexts, namely that it becomes a challenge to national pride when a high percentage of highly skilled workers have to be imported. And that pride is possible to bump into in public discussion, and that's been happening in Norway, where in recent weeks some challenges about the number of foreigners in academia have been promoted in the media, and then foreigners themselves have attempted to respond to that, an activity which is not for the faint of heart. The appreciation of the internationalization of the universities is in and of itself then a controversial issue, and I think that we're not using it enough. Nonetheless, just as an anecdote, I can tell you that in 2015, when I became the rector of what is now called Oslo Metropolitan University, that was the first time in the history of this country that a non-Norwegian had been at the head of an institution of higher education. So the internationalization of the sector has taken a very long time. But we continue to work for even more internationalization in different ways as triggered by some of the causes of migration that were mentioned earlier. For example, one important program that many of the institutions of Norway, including my own, are increasing their engagement with is an international program called Scholars at Risk, where we try to create opportunities for scholars, especially in war-torn areas, to be able to pursue their careers for a while in Norway. And actually just the other day, we initiated a process with two scholars from Afghanistan who will be coming for 2 years each to the Norwegian University of Life Sciences soon, and that's an activity that increases the internationalization of the institution. I'd like to talk for a little bit about climate. Climate and climate change are, of course, one of the big sources of migration, as was mentioned by way of introduction today. I spent last week in Glasgow at COP26, and that was a fascinating experience, but I find that although we're now all talking about the consequences of climate change for poor countries, our discussion in Norway is nonetheless more about science than about the social sustainability that's related to that. So we're talking about climate change, we're talking about biodiversity, we're talking about environmental issues, we're talking about sustainable economics, but we're not talking quite so much about social sustainability, maybe because we live in such a safe country, I don't know. And that's where I would like to mention, especially one of the sustainability arenas that we have at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. We have this group that's working with a project called Towards Sustainable Cities and Communities. And what they do in their work there is try to explore local transformation in the face of these global challenges. So they take issues like climate change, like COVID-19, like rapid urbanization, and think and work about how that is connected to health and well-being, to issues about sustainable development, and how that connects to the feeling of social belonging in everyday interactions, environmental quality of local surroundings, and so on. The challenges that they find are grounded in things like rising polarization, which is also perhaps a consequence of migration, crises of legitimacy, and social inequality. They take, and we take, an interdisciplinary approach to sort of co-learning, you might say, by working closely with communities who face these kinds of challenges, but they also bring the force of our work in green technology and nature-based solutions into that discussion. We also are doing work on what we call green smart cities, where we're trying to draw from all of the different groups at the University of Life Sciences who are working on agriculture and new technologies for agriculture, working on changing the structure of plants so that they deliver more protein, and working on, not least of all, the resources of the ocean and Norway's unique position there, bringing these all together in new ways to think about how to make sustainable cities and more sustainable working environments, living environments, so that as those cities experience the pressure of migration and internationalization, they're prepared to tackle those challenges in a sustainable way. We talk a lot, and I'm sure that we're going to continue talking today about big context issues, but especially as became clear in the last presentation, migration is ultimately about individuals and the impact that those individuals experience and the societies that they come to experience. And the contexts for those are many and rich: social injustice and war, we've heard about already. The pandemic, of course, is very present in all of our minds, but also the nature of the workforce. As a migrant myself, I feel the effect of migration, and I see it sometimes in my family, sometimes in those around me. Some people lose their sense of belonging, and for me, I found it not in becoming a Norwegian, which I'm not, but rather in having a heightened understanding of myself as a foreigner, which is a completely central part of my identity. And part of what's been difficult for me in this debate in Norway in recent weeks is that I try to engage in it as a foreigner, and then what I get back from Norwegians is, no, not you, you're not a foreigner. So I'm denied my identity as a foreigner because I'm a relatively well-integrated one, and that leaves me with no position. And it's a very strange experience. So those individual costs can be very, very high. and really go very, very deep into one's identity. Some of that has been exacerbated by the pandemic, so isolation from one's family. And for example, I have never seen once in Norway any discussion whatsoever about the cost of the pandemic for foreigners who live in Norway, even though it's a totally special situation, and that's not a discussion which is possible for a foreigner to raise. So because of cultural issues. So I think that while it's incredibly important to study migration and mobility academically, and I'm deeply committed to that approach to the generation of knowledge, it's also important societally to continue to heighten awareness about the individual side of mobility and internationalization, and to find ways not to be offended by that, but rather to use that as a resource in our further development. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Rice. I think it's hard to just end these presentations. I think there's just a lot of like, can we ask questions? We're not going to do that today for the sake of our friends that are watching us remotely. But what's wonderful is that there are questions, at least in my mind, being raised, and I wish that I could ask you those questions. So there will be more to come, right, in terms of all of these amazing